Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream, and thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Welcome to all of our members, subscribers, and viewers from all across the world. 2 days ago, we spoke about the historic Egyptian Chinese drill in Sinai, in Egypt, something that both Egypt and China did not talk much about. A lot of things have been kept secret, but more bits of information are being released, including an Israeli comment on this drill that's taking place on the Israeli borders, according to the reports in Israel, something that is concerning Israel. And there were lots of comments coming in from Israelis relating to that too. However, we're also going to talk about the latest developments in Israel with the head of the Shin Bet blaming Benjamin Netanyahu for going against the Supreme Court with certain orders that he was receiving from Benjamin Netanyahu that are similar to a mafia boss orders being given to gangsters and criminals. And we're also going to talk about the latest developments in the region altogether, alongside very relevant things to do with Smotrich comments that are being made about the prisoners of war and the situation that Itamar Ben Gvir, Netanyahu, one of his closest aides, the situation that he faced in Miami. He's visiting Miami now. The United States is still having senior delegations coming from Israel without any problems whatsoever. There were meetings with senior officials coming from Israel to the UK, and still senior officials from Israel are going to the United States. Now, let's begin with this report here. So, the peace agreement with Egypt collapsing, Chinese fighter jets on Israel's border for the first time. This was the first comment coming from the Israeli media about this drill that's taking place between Egypt and China. In Egypt, called Civilization Eagle 2025. In Israel, they're not mentioning much about the details of this drill, but they're saying that this is a very large drill and there are very advanced fighter jets coming from China, including the J-10CE that Egypt reportedly already received. Now, despite a lot of censorship and the feedback or the reports about Egypt receiving the J-10CE, the first batch was back in February this year, meaning that something is there, and this could potentially be training on these fighter jets inside of Egyptian territories. Of course, that could have taken place in China previously, but typically, as with the Chinese norm, they keep it secret. In Egypt, hardly anyone is talking about this. Egypt is trying to not make a big scene out of this. But in Israel, of course, they're watching. And there's so much they can ignore and deny. Now, in this report, they're saying that, well, the peace with Egypt is getting colder and it's on its way to collapse. Egypt is shifting away slowly but surely from the United States. Over 2 decades ago, it was purely United States equipment that the Egyptians had. In the last 10 years, in the past decade, Egypt has been diversifying its arsenal, going to other countries too, going to China, going to Russia, going to other countries, and not necessarily restricting themselves to the United States of America. Now, that, of course, is something that is bothering Israel, not only at a senior level, but from the population level as well. So there were lots of comments coming about this report here in Israel, saying that, for example, the Egyptians are playing with fire and they will end up suffering a huge defeat because Israel will have no choice but to return to the trench, according to one of the comments written here about this report, there were other comments that, well, Egypt is the biggest threat to the state of Israel. Egypt is the biggest threat to the state of Israel. It's the biggest enemy to the state of Israel. And one of them was saying, I warned you from that. They are the biggest enemies, and there is no peace with them. It's only a matter of time when Egypt will have a war with Israel, alongside dozens of other comments from the Israeli public too, stating different facts. Of course, that there's no trade between Egypt and Israel, that Egypt was supporting Gaza, they were supporting Hamas secretly, that Egypt contributed to the 7th of October. Benjamin Netanyahu's finance minister blamed them outright for saying that, well, they are the lifeline. Then Benjamin Netanyahu called the southern border of Gaza the southern border of the axis of evil at one point. All of that is raising alarm bells in Israel, and they are also seeing this as a threat, especially with China being involved, bearing in mind the hostile Chinese approach with Israel in relation to Palestine. This is something very significant. But again, Egypt and China, both of them, they are not publishing a lot of information about this. Hardly anything is coming out about the nature of the drill. Why is it happening exactly? And what are they looking to get out of it? That is the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Now, the second thing that I wanted to talk to you about, the Pope died today, and in Israel, well, there are people who are celebrating. People who are celebrating, in articles being published about the Pope, and one of them was actually saying that, hold on a second, the Pope, he is responsible for the rise in anti-Semitism. That's the former ambassador to Italy from Israel. He's saying that the Pope was responsible for anti-Semitism, and his views over the years are reminiscent of the Pope's conduct during the Holocaust. Israel still holds a grudge to the Pope's approach during the Holocaust. And now they're saying this Pope, he is in charge or responsible for the rise of anti-Semitism. Why? For sympathizing with Gazans. Basic sympathy towards Gazans and sympathizing with the Palestinian people. As a matter of fact, there were multiple reports that the Pope himself was in daily communication with one of the churches inside of the Gaza Strip, getting constant feedback about the situation and updates. Israel didn't like that. As a matter of fact, multiple Israeli delegations went to the Vatican previously, trying to convince the Vatican to have an Israeli approach, to condemn. Do you remember the old days, the condemnation, as if the condemnation was a prerequisite to everything on earth. If you're asleep somehow, oh, do you condemn them? You wake up, do you condemn? You're brushing your teeth, do you condemn? You're about to have your coffee, do you condemn? It's as if everyone was asked to condemn the victims, the Palestinians, for standing up, barely doing anything, in comparison to Israel. But you had to condemn. Of course, this was a part of a bigger propaganda campaign and psychological warfare against the people who bravely stood up against this abhorrent genocide and its abhorrent backers as well across the world. And the Pope did not submit to these demands. As a matter of fact, the Pope, some people consider this position to be a very good position, and Hamas themselves, they actually said good things about the Pope, and they actually came up with a statement today during which they said that the Pope was an advocate and a friend for the Palestinians. The Pope was an advocate and friend for the Palestinian people, and they said many good things about him and his humanitarian support, his humanitarian approach towards the situation in Gaza and in general. And again, on the comment section and that report in Israel, The people were going wild. One of them said, I'm going to have a trance party during his funeral. Another guy said, celebrate. Good riddance, comments like that about the Pope's death. Again, a man who is considered to be number one for the Catholics, of course. That is the response that is coming from Israel. And the ambassador himself, the previous ambassador, he's saying we shouldn't send a delegation. He said that Israel shouldn't send a delegation to his funeral, even if it's invited. Some people were arguing that we need to send the minister of religion. You know, the minister of religion is enough, more than enough to go. Some were saying, no, outright, don't send anyone. Others were saying, well, Netanyahu is going to, send a delegation to save face for himself because he doesn't care about anything, really. That is in relation to the Pope and his death and the responses that are coming from Israel and the responses that are coming from Hamas and from the Palestinian Authority as well. Moving on to the next subject that I wanted to talk to you about, the situation between the head of the Shabak and Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu sacked the head of the Shin Bet. The head of the Shin Bet refused the Netanyahu order, and we have a court case. There's a court case. The Supreme Court in Israel said, no, Netanyahu actually cannot sack him. And as a matter of fact, Benjamin Netanyahu cannot actually have people to propose for this position up until the situation is settled. Now, the more time goes by, the more it appears to be that we might reach a settlement at some point. But nothing is going to happen without a fight. And now the head of the Shin Bet is publishing more information about Benjamin Netanyahu and his conduct and his behavior with the Shin Bet and the orders that he was giving him. So there was one report in Ynet in Israel speaking about the Shin Bet chief, saying Netanyahu said, I would obey him and not the high court, and asked for details about protest activists. This is a bombshell coming from the head of the Shin Bet. Of course, Netanyahu wants to get rid of him because of the Qatar Gate, what's labeled as the Qatar Gate, and the people working around Benjamin Netanyahu who reportedly received money from Qatar, lobbyists working with the United States and Israel, and they were people very close to Benjamin Netanyahu dealing with the negotiations. Benjamin Netanyahu has been constantly talking about Qatar and, calling them supporters of terror and this and that in the media. But he has been dealing with them for over a decade. And his closest aides in his establishment received money, reportedly. Now, the Shin Bet and the head of the Shin Bet, they were leading an investigation. They were leading an investigation because to them, you can't be next to the prime minister and get money like that with a country that is participant in the ceasefire agreement. What's happening exactly? Netanyahu didn't like that. Outright, of course, denied everything, although there's proof. And he wanted to sack the head of the Shin Bet now so that this investigation does not continue, because he doesn't want another investigation. And this investigation could relate to the security of the state, national security, something very serious. He already had something against him in relation to national security when he approved the sale of German submarines to Egypt, something that was equation changing at the time, and clearly knew about it. He denied initially, and then he confirmed, but he said it was agreed upon, and he did not include the people who were relevant to approve this purchase coming from Egypt, clearly getting lots of money in the process. And now he's trying to sack the head of Shin Bet because he doesn't want something else against him during a sensitive period, where he is, facing all of this a big problem with the Supreme Court, the protests, of course, against him, people signing petitions against him, all of this happening. And the head of the Shin Bet is not holding back. He's saying, he asked me to obey him directly and not obey the Supreme Court. And He wanted information about activists. Which activists? He wanted information about activists who are protesting against him. Imagine how paranoid he is. This is paranoia. If you, okay, you're the prime minister of a country. People are going to love you. People are going to hate you. Is there 100? Of course not. No one, no prime minister or president or leader ever got 100% approval. I mean, even if you're a saint or an angel, you're not going to get approval 100% from 100% of the people. But if there are people protesting, supposedly in a country that calls itself democratic, with freedom of speech, people should be able to say what they want, really. I mean, criticize the president or the prime minister, what have you. And if there is something dangerous, so let's say if something is a security breach, something that reaches a level of, for example, threatening the life of the prime minister or the president, then you have relevant security bodies in the country that deal with matters such as this. In Israel, it's the Shin Bet. So the Shin Bet will understand if there is someone actually planning to hurt Netanyahu. Now, usually, if someone is planning to hurt him or take action against him, violent or, I don't know, assassination attempt or whatever, they wouldn't necessarily be going to protest, because when you're protesting, you're sending a message, you're sending multiple messages. When you put your face out there, when you're protesting, you're sending multiple messages. Number one, this is me, this is my name, and I am protesting, and I am not afraid to show my face, and I'm still going to criticize the prime minister. They know that he knows them. The security establishment are going to know them. Their names there, the face identification, whatever it is. Why? Because they are conducting a perfectly legal and peaceful action to oppose actions that are being taken by the government. For a prime minister to reach a level where he is asking for information about activists going to protest, that is absolute paranoia. This is a very paranoid and scared individual. And the head of the Shin Bet is confirming that. He's asking for information about the individual. Why would it matter to him? He is secured by everyone. He has a security team, hundreds of people securing Benjamin Netanyahu. Strict measures. Movements everywhere. Everything is cleared before he goes. People surrounding him 24/7. People undercover too. No, who can touch him? It's very difficult. So it's not like there's imminent threat against him now, although of course tensions are rising. But why would he want information about the people? And by the way, you're talking about Israeli people, like Israeli Jews, Zionists, most of them, who are just protesting against the war. Some of them are even families of the prisoners of war. And he wants this information about it. Now Ronen Bar, the head of the Shin Bet, still serving, is saying that this man wanted me to provide information for him. And he is saying that why? Because it's not his right, the prime minister, to start asking for information about individuals from the relevant bodies, because it's their job. Their job is to get the information, who's protesting, for example, why here and there. Of course, you can argue that, okay, police state, whatever it is, about protesters being monitored and what have you. But that happens, of course, almost in every country. People are, monitored, who protests what, to what level, what slogans, what have you. Okay. But that's not his business. That's not Netanyahu's business. That's the business of the Shin Bet in Israel, who will analyze who's going, who's not going, and take the relevant action from there. And most of these protests, by the way, in Israel, they are prioritized. There's crackdowns, there's violence against them from the police, but we have seen also feuds between the police that ultimately belongs to Ben Gvir and the Israeli Shin Bet, who is run by Ronen Bar still to this day. So this is causing Benjamin Netanyahu even more problems, because it's showing him in his true color, a paranoid individual who is asking for information about individuals protesting against him. That's in relation to Benjamin Netanyahu and the statements that came from Ronen Bar against Benjamin Netanyahu. Moving on to the next subject that I wanted to talk to you about. It has been clear from day one that the Israeli government was not interested in what it calls the hostages, i.e., the prisoners of war. They massacred Israelis on the 7th of October in Re'im, in the Nova Festival, in Kibbutz Be'eri, in Nir Oz, and they were targeting everything that was moving back to Gaza. Confirmed reports from Israel, from pilots in the IDF, who were ordered to shoot at everything going back to Gaza without analyzing or trying to validate the information. Then reports coming in confirmations from the prisoners of war who were released later on that they were targeted multiple times. The buildings they were in turned into rubble. They almost died from the IDF attacks. And of course, these were the ones who survived. Others did not survive. And we're talking about, in Israeli words, over 42. That's the bare minimum. Over 42 Israel killed deliberately. And now we've had recent reports from the Palestinian resistance saying that they conducted multiple attacks, not only against Aidan Alexander, who's most likely dead, but also other groups of prisoners of war inside of the Gaza Strip, with the Palestinian resistance saying that multiple attacks happened on the same place. It's as if Israel had some sort of intel about their whereabouts and they targeted them again. Why? So that they can kill them and get rid of this bargaining chip, what they call the bargaining chip, held by Hamas, so that they can strip them of power. Okay, or negotiating power or leverage or cards. But they always claimed that it's the hostages, and bring back the hostages and everything will end, and the hostages, or the sausages, as Keir Starmer said at one point. And of course, world leaders, hostages, the endless babbling. Is the Israeli government interested in the hostages? No, they're not. Of course not. They kill them. They brutalize them. They murder them. They call the families of the prisoners of war Hamas. But now, thankfully, they reveal themselves again. They reveal themselves time after time. This is what's good about this government. They constantly do us a favor, everyone a favor. I mean, of course, mainstream media will deny or ignore or not report. But, thankfully, it's in Israeli media. Sometimes you just quote them. Okay, what happened now? Smotrich is saying the kidnapped are not the most important target. Can you get more blunt than that? I thought it was about the hostages. I thought it was about the hostages or sausages, as Starmer said, kid starver. It's not about them. The person who is, the most powerful person in the government after Netanyahu, Smotrich, is saying they're not the most important target. As a matter of fact, you can understand from Netanyahu's statements, from reading between the lines, that Netanyahu himself doesn't consider them to be the most important target, because he's saying we're not willing to get to a deal at any cost. Meaning, person doesn't care, dude. The man doesn't care about them. Outright, they are not the most important target. Can you get clearer than that? It's just one step away from saying they're not even a target. They're not even an aim. It's not even an aim to get them back. And of course, people were fuming, and some politicians from the opposition were criticizing. And then, of course, the families of the prisoners of war, again, lashing out against Bezalel Smotrich, telling him that you're selling the stage, you have no soul in you, continuing endless comments against him. Not only that, there was Itamar Ben Gvir in the United States. Itamar Ben Gvir, of course, the United States is the land of the free and home of the brave. Land of the free and home of the brave, welcoming mass murderers, genocidal criminals, terrorists outright. Itamar Ben Gvir went to Miami. He was met by an Israeli or several Israelis. Okay? They waited for it. What were they saying to him? Well, there was a video showing exactly what one of these women said to him when he arrived at the airport. And here we go. So they didn't spare him anything. Racist, you don't care about the hostages, you don't care about the children in Gaza too, and you're a racist, you're a dog, you're a S, the S word. And his response is, you're a leftist. That's his response, leftist. The only thing that was missing, that he would call her Hamas. You know, that was the only thing left, of course, Hamas. Anyway, these people, that's escalating inside of Israel, outside of Israel, from Israelis themselves, following Ben Gvir anywhere he goes, not just Netanyahu, but the ministers of Benjamin Netanyahu as well. Which leads me to the final thing that I wanted to share with you in this live stream. Benjamin Netanyahu received multiple okays or approvals from Donald Trump. Donald Trump, as soon as he came to power, he started saying, all hell will break loose if Hamas doesn't accept the deal. Then we had the moment when he sent Witkoff, and Witkoff told Netanyahu, well, that hell that Trump was talking about includes you if you don't reach a ceasefire. The ceasefire happened. Trump started to come up with these absurd, bizarre, abhorrent, morally depraved propositions for Gaza, preposterous, saying that they need to leave and it's going to be a state, basically, or, another Mar-a-Lago. It's fine. To do okay, and the people will leave, and we're going to turn it into one wonderful place. Okay, but according to one of Benjamin Netanyahu's closest ex-allies, who is now a very vocal critic, a person who criticizes him very well, a critical voice against him, Avigdor Lieberman. He was in Netanyahu's government previously, served as the defense minister, deputy prime minister, and as a matter of fact, his party and the Likud party once merged, only for them to later on split, similar to what happens with almost everyone who went into a government with Benjamin Netanyahu. That's why at one point we've had 6 elections in 7 years in Israel. Avigdor Lieberman, there was a statement from him, and they're calling it in Israel a bombshell. This statement is a bombshell coming from Avigdor Lieberman. What is this bombshell coming from Avigdor Lieberman? He was speaking about the United States and Iran, Gaza, and he's saying Netanyahu doesn't have any intention of attacking the nuclear program in Iran. It's all talk, all nonsense. And we are at a boiling point. Violent discourse is rampant on the networks. I mean, we spoke about some of the things that are being, mentioned and posted in Israeli social media, much more on other social medias too, and comments, of course, on news and updates. But the bombshell, according to Avigdor Lieberman, is not any of that. Is the fact that he went and he visited an American official who is very close to Donald Trump. And according to that report, after he met with this official who was very close to Donald Trump, he said, well, I spoke with Saturday, an old friend in Washington, who is very knowledgeable about American politics. He told me serious things. He said that Bibi is starting to get on Trump's nerves and that he is starting to lose patience and attention to Israel. This has far reaching consequences. We see that Trump is not counting Netanyahu nor Israel. They are going to conduct negotiations with Hamas alone without taking us into account. This is a little bit different than what we're seeing. This is a little bit different than the statements of Donald Trump, this full support, this criticism of Hamas, all of these plans, the all hell will break loose and get them out now and free them and. But there is something to it. Why is there something to it? There's something to it because number one, Witkoff was reported to tell Benjamin Netanyahu that the hell includes you if you don't get a ceasefire. Okay, we got in, Israel broke it. All right. Then there were other things too that indicate that Trump wasn't necessarily relying only on Israel in terms of the negotiations, in relation to the negotiations. Why? Well, because they had direct talks with Hamas at one point, didn't they? Adam Bowler, who called Hamas nice guys, they're just like us, nice guys like us. I spoke to you about the Knafi report, right? Knafi and orange juice after midnight between Hamas and US officials. They got a little bit peckish after midnight negotiating. And clearly that means that Donald Trump was not necessarily relying on Benjamin Netanyahu to reach a deal because, well, he wants a deal at the end of the day. They don't want this to go on forever. That's an argument. The other argument is, of course, well, they're still providing them with weapons. He's still supporting them endlessly, which is valid and accurate. But that doesn't necessarily always reflect what happens behind the scenes. What happens behind the scenes is a little bit different than what we see in the headlines or by the statements. Now, did these things happen before? They did. They did happen with the Obama administration. They happened with the Biden administration too. Over a year ago, there was this call that happened between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu when Joe Biden was reportedly swearing at Benjamin Netanyahu and SOB and this and that. And after that, there was a period, at the time I called it the semi-ceasefire, the undeclared ceasefire. Things started to de-escalate. More aid was starting to go in, and Palestinians were starting to go back to the north. Prisoners were being released too. Are we seeing a situation like this? Perhaps. Again, there's a lack of clarity, and there is something that is being portrayed to the people. And usually what's being portrayed as to the people comes to serve multiple purposes. Number one, purposes to do with accomplishing certain things on the ground. So the people who are at war or in conflict together, they wouldn't want to send signals by having certain statements. We want to act tough and flex muscles or try to flex muscles. They end up looking like a fool. Like fools at one point, especially with how many times Donald Trump did a 180 and Benjamin Netanyahu himself did a 180 before. But that doesn't mean that that's what happens behind closed doors. And that doesn't mean that this is a true reflection of what's happening. And that doesn't mean we're seeing the full picture. At the end of the day, we're probably dealing just with 5% and trying to dig a little bit deeper to kind of understand and analyze. Because, of course, the reality on the ground is very far from what they want us to believe. That's to say the least. Now, is there a prospect that Donald Trump might apply some pressure soon on Benjamin Netanyahu to try and reach an agreement in Gaza? The short answer is yes. Yes, of course, with multiple additions, right? Multiple notes. But yes, why? Well, it's because that meeting that he had with Benjamin Netanyahu, it wasn't so much a meeting rather than a calling Benjamin Netanyahu. When he called him on Monday, he came from Hungary to the United States. he had, of course, to calculate his route very carefully over Europe so that he doesn't go over countries and he might have, to have an emergency landing and all of a sudden he's wanted. So he took a very careful path to the United States at the time. But he went to Donald Trump only for several hours. And Netanyahu visibly wasn't very comfortable. Donald Trump was saying things about reaching a deal with Iran, praising the Turkish president who called Netanyahu Hitler, and who was backing the Palestinian resistance, and statements and actions saying, praising the armed wings of the Palestinian political groups too, and also telling Benjamin Netanyahu that he has to be sensible. What does that say? Well, that says that Donald Trump might reach that point, and we might actually be getting closer to that point. Because if you recall, when the genocide started, Netanyahu's traditional allies were giving him a blank check. Free, do whatever you want. They weren't counting the children. They weren't counting humanitarian aid. They weren't counting Gazans. They weren't counting anything. And it's as if the 1-ton bombs that were landing every single day, killing 600, 700, 800 people, up to 1,000 people a day. By the way, the first few days of the genocide were the worst in terms of casualties per day, if you recall that time. But Israel's traditional allies, they weren't saying a word. Nothing. Why? Because they gave Benjamin Netanyahu a time limit. That time limit was reported to be 30 to 40 days at the time. After that, we started to notice a shift. They were still despicable in their approach towards Israel and ignoring and denying the rights of the Palestinian people. But all of a sudden, people started to question, to ask. And Benjamin Netanyahu was being put in a more difficult position. So there could be a point where, well, now Netanyahu broke the ceasefire. Of course, the United States is still backing them. At the end of the day, it's proven that the Palestinian resistance cannot be defeated inside of the Gaza Strip. And Donald Trump isn't able or isn't in a position to always keep that front open. And we might reach a stage where he would tell him enough is enough. Now, is that going to sit well with Benjamin Netanyahu? And is that going to be in line with his plans for the future? Netanyahu is, at the end of the day, planning to remain there up until October 2026. In 2026, October, you're going to have a new election inside of the state of Israel. Netanyahu now, he's already taking multiple steps, not only to obstruct that, but people in Israel are saying that he wants to cancel elections. Gvir Island, the retired major general, the other day, quoted him at the time, said Netanyahu's planning to cancel elections. And by the way, don't view this as something very far-fetched. No, not at all, because the move from what he called a democracy to a dictatorship, it comes in steps. He's having more control of the army, more control over the Shin Bet. He already has full control over the police. He wants to control the Supreme Court. And tomorrow he'll come up with any excuse to also control the Israeli elections or even cancel them. And these were the main things that I wanted to share with you in this live stream. As usual, I hope I added some beneficial information for you, and I will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone. Salam.